The Great Hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with excitement. Hundreds of alien representatives sat in the circular chamber, their attention focused on the massive holographic display floating in the center. The image showed a small fleet of ships, recently discovered at the edges of what the Council considered civilized space. Admiral Dax stood at the speaker's podium, his tall frame casting a shadow across the polished surface. His gray skin gleamed under the bright lights as he gestured toward the hologram with 4 of his 6 arms. "As you can see," he said, fighting to keep the amusement from his voice, "these vessels belong to a species calling themselves humans. Our initial scans indicate their largest ship is barely 1/3 the size of our standard patrol vessel." Laughter rippled through the chamber. In the Earth section, Intelligence Officer Tom Miller sat quietly, his weathered face betraying no emotion. At 55 years old, he had spent enough time in diplomatic circles to know when silence was the best strategy. He adjusted his simple blue uniform and continued taking notes. The Council President, a being named Reed, raised his hand for silence. "Admiral Dax, please continue with your tactical assessment." "Of course, President Reed." Dax enlarged the hologram, highlighting one of the human ships. "Their technology appears to be functional, but primitive by our standards. The vessels show signs of basic fusion drives, simple shield generators, and what we assume are primitive weapon systems." More chuckles echoed through the chamber. A representative from the warrior Krax species stood up, his armored plates clicking. "Why are we even discussing these humans? They're clearly no threat to the Council's peace. Protocol demands we assess all new spacefaring races," President Reed replied. "Though in this case, I tend to agree with your assessment." Tom Miller watched as the Council members passed around images of Earth's ships on their datapads. He noticed their dismissive gestures, their confident smirks, their casual disregard. 20 years of diplomatic service had taught him to read alien body language well enough. Admiral Dax continued his presentation, pointing out what he considered design flaws in the human vessels. "Look at the compact nature of their ships. How do they even fit a proper crew in there? And the energy readings are surprisingly low. They must be using outdated reactor technology." The hologram shifted to show a comparison between a Council battlecruiser and Earth's largest vessel. The size difference was dramatic, making the human ship look like a toy beside the alien craft. "I propose," Dax announced, "that we send a diplomatic mission to Earth. A small fleet of our ships should be sufficient to welcome them to the galactic community." His emphasis on welcome made his true intentions clear. This would be a show of force. President Reed nodded thoughtfully. "All in favor of sending a diplomatic fleet to Earth? Please indicate so now." The chamber lit up with green approval lights. Tom Miller counted them carefully. 82% in favor. He made a note in his datapad, his fingers steady despite the gravity of the situation. "The motion passes," Reed declared. "Admiral Dax, you will lead the diplomatic mission. Prepare your fleet and depart within 3 standard cycles." As the session ended, Miller stood and made his way toward the exit. He overheard snippets of conversation as he passed various alien groups. "Such tiny ships. They must be primitive. This will be the quickest diplomatic mission ever." Near the door, Admiral Dax stepped into his path. "Officer Miller," he said, looming over the human, "I look forward to visiting your homeworld. I trust your people will be cooperative." Miller looked up at the Admiral, his face professional and pleasant. "We always aim to be cooperative, Admiral. Humanity values peaceful relations." "Excellent," Dax replied, his 4 secondary arms clasped behind his back. "Then this should be a simple matter of establishing proper hierarchy within the Council." As Miller walked away, he pulled out his secure communicator. He had a lot to report to Earth Command, and very little time. Let them laugh at the size of human ships, he thought. Let them mock our technology. They would learn soon enough. The message he sent was brief and encrypted. "Priority 1. Council fleet incoming. Diplomatic SHOW of Favorci recommend activation of PROTOCFO Omega. Then he smiled, just a little, remembering an old Earth saying. Good things come in small packages. The command center of Earth Defense Force headquarters buzzed with activity. Admiral Jane Wilson stood before the main screen, her gray hair neatly tied back, watching as Miller's encrypted message flashed across the display. So, she said, turning to face the gathered officers, they think our ships are toys. A slight smile crossed her face. Time to show them what these toys can do. Activate the compact fleet. The room erupted into controlled chaos as officers rushed to their stations. On the massive screen, dots of light began appearing as ships across the solar system acknowledged their orders. Status report, Wilson commanded. Captain Rogers, a young officer with steady hands, pulled up the fleet data. 50 ships responding. Admiral, all compact-class vessels are ready for Operation Hornet's Nest. Wilson nodded, remembering the long years of development that had led to this moment. 20 years ago, when humans first reached for the stars, they had made a crucial discovery. Bigger wasn't always better. The memory played in her mind as she watched the fleet assemble. She had been a young captain then, present at the meeting that changed humanity's approach to space warfare. Admiral, Rogers interrupted her thoughts. Would you like to review the fleet composition? Display it, she ordered, and the screen filled with ship classifications. Compact fleet roster. 20 WASP-class strike craft. 15 B-class support vessels. 10 Hornet-class combat ships. 5 Queen-class command vessels. Each ship was a masterpiece of miniaturization, where alien ships wasted space on grand corridors and ceremonial chambers. Human vessels packed advanced technology into every available inch. Where alien ships needed crews of thousands, human ships operated with less than 50 personnel, their systems managed by cutting-edge AI. Message from deep space sensors, another officer called out. The Council fleet has entered the solar system. 10 capital ships, each over 3 kilometers in length. Wilson allowed herself a small chuckle. Right on schedule. Time to greet our visitors. Launch the fleet. Across the solar system, hidden shipyards came to life. The compact fleet emerged from their concealed docks, their dark hulls barely reflecting the distant sunlight. Each ship was barely 300 meters long, looking like insects compared to the approaching alien vessels. In her private command room, Wilson opened a channel to the fleet. This is Admiral Wilson to all ships. You know why we built our vessels this way. You know what we can do. The aliens think size equals power. Let's show them how wrong they are. The compact fleet moved into formation, their engines burning with a precision that would have shocked the Council engineers. The smaller size of human ships meant better power-to-mass ratios, faster acceleration, and tighter maneuvers than anything the aliens had seen before. On the Council flagship, Admiral Dax stood on his command bridge, watching the human fleet approach. Look at them, he laughed, gesturing to his officers. Their entire fleet could fit in our main hangar bay. His second-in-command zoomed in on the human ships. Sir, they appear to be moving into some sort of attack formation. Attack formation. Dax's laughter grew louder. Let them try. Send them our message. Let's see how quickly they surrender when they realize what they're facing. The Council's message boomed across space. This is Admiral Dax of the Galactic Council. Your fleet is drastically outmatched. Submit to Council authority immediately. Back on her command ship, Wilson received the message. She turned to her communications officer. Send our response. Keep it simple. The officer nodded and transmitted. This is Admiral Wilson of the Earth Defense Force. Welcome to Sol System. We hope you've enjoyed your journey. It's about to get very interesting. Wilson looked at the tactical display showing the massive Council ships approaching her tiny fleet. They had no idea that every human vessel carried technologies they couldn't even imagine. Quantum computers that could outthink their entire fleet. engines that could turn on a dime, weapons that could strike with surgical precision. All ships, she commanded, prepare to execute Operation Hornet's Nest. Let's show them why size doesn't matter when you know how to use what you've got. The compact fleet moved forward, their formation tight and purposeful. The Council ships loomed ahead, their massive hulls blocking out the stars. The real fight was about to begin. The massive Council ships fired their warning shots, great beams of energy that lit up space like artificial suns. They deliberately aimed wide, expecting the small human fleet to scatter in panic. Instead, something unexpected happened. The human ships moved, not in panic, but with purpose. Their movements were unlike anything the Council gunners had ever seen. Quick, precise, and completely coordinated. Where alien ships would lumber and turn slowly, the human vessels spun and accelerated with impossible agility. On the Council flagship's bridge, Admiral Dax leaned forward in his command chair. "What are they doing?" he demanded, watching the strange dance of human ships. His weapons officer looked confused. "Sir, they're movement patterns. They're not in our tactical database. We can't get a targeting lock." The human fleet split into smaller groups. The Wasp-class ships darted forward like arrows, while the larger vessels spread out in a complex pattern. Before Dax could issue new orders, the first wave of human ships disappeared from their sensors. "Impossible," Dax shouted. "Find them." "Sir, they're too small. Their heat signatures are minimal, and they're moving too fast for our tracking systems." Suddenly, alarm sirens blared across the Council fleet. The human ships reappeared, directly in the blind spots of the Council's massive weapons arrays. Spots that existed because no one had ever thought to defend against ships so small. Admiral Wilson's voice crackled across the command channel. "Operation Hornet's Nest, Phase 1. Execute." The Wasp-class ships struck first. They didn't fire conventional weapons. Instead, they released clouds of what looked like metallic dust. The Council crews laughed at first, until their sensors started going dark. "Status report," Dax demanded as his screens flickered. "Sir, the dust. It's not dust. They're microscopic drones. They're getting into our sensor arrays, our weapon ports. The officer's voice cut off as the ship's main power fluctuated. The human ships had struck precisely at the Council vessel's weak points. Points that only existed because their ships were so large they needed external sensor arrays and cooling vents. On her command ship, Wilson watched the battle unfold. "Phase 2, she ordered calmly. The Hornet-class ships moved in next. Their small size had hidden their true purpose. Each carried an electromagnetic pulse weapon more powerful than anything the Council had seen. The human engineers had discovered that smaller ships could handle the electromagnetic kickback better than larger vessels. 3 Council capital ships went dark as precision EMP strikes overloaded their massive power grids. Their emergency systems, designed to handle conventional attacks, proved useless against this new type of warfare. "This is impossible." Dax raged as he watched his fleet being systematically disabled. "They're not even firing real weapons." A junior officer spoke up, his voice shaking. "Sir, we're detecting energy buildups in their support vessels." The B-class support ships had moved into position. What the Council hadn't realized was that their small size allowed them to carry incredibly concentrated energy cells. As one, they activated their quantum field generators, creating a web of disruptive energy that trapped the remaining Council ships. "Final phase," Wilson commanded. "Show them our teeth." The Queen-class command ships, which had held back until now, powered up their main weapons. Their size had hidden their true power. Weapons built with human miniaturization technology packed the punch of a Council dreadnought into a ship 1/3 the size. "Admiral Dax," Wilson's voice came through clearly on all channels. "Your ships are disabled. Your sensors are blind. Your weapons are compromised. Would you like to reconsider your diplomatic approach?" On his darkened bridge, surrounded by malfunctioning equipment and panicked crew members, Dax stared at the tactical display. In less than 15 minutes, without firing a single destructive shot, the human fleet had completely neutralized 3 Council capital ships and trapped the rest. "How?" he whispered. "How is this possible?" The answer came from his tactical officer. "Sir, they didn't build small ships because they had to. They built them because they chose to. Everything about their design. It was deliberate." Wilson's voice came through again. "Admiral Dax, we await your response. The next demonstration will not be non-lethal." Dax looked at his crippled fleet, finally understanding. The humans hadn't built an inferior force. They had revolutionized space combat itself, and he had led his fleet right into their trap. "Open a channel," he said quietly. "I believe we need to revise our diplomatic approach." In the emergency analysis chamber of the Council flagship, dozens of alien technicians huddled around holographic displays showing scans of the human vessels. 3 hours had passed since their humiliating defeat, and Admiral Dax stood at the back of the room, his pride still stinging. "This cannot be right," muttered head analyst Baker, his tentacles waving in agitation as he studied the readings. "According to these scans, their power output per cubic meter is 5 times higher than our best reactors." The room fell silent as Intelligence Officer Tom Miller walked in, escorted by 2 Council guards. He carried a small data pad, looking perfectly calm despite being surrounded by former enemies. "Perhaps," Miller said quietly, "you're asking the wrong questions. Instead of wondering how our ships are so small, you should ask why your ships are so big." Dax moved forward, towering over Miller. "Explain." Miller connected his pad to the main display. The hologram shifted to show the internal layout of a standard Council warship, then split to compare it with a human vessel of equal power output. "Look here," Miller pointed. "Your reactor rooms have 10 meters of safety spacing on all sides. Ours have 2 meters of advanced shielding. Your corridors are 5 meters wide. Ours are just wide enough for 2 people to pass. Your bridge is the size of a concert hall. Ours." He smiled. "Well, we prefer things cozy." Another analyst, his scales flickering with excitement, pulled up new data. "The human ships use quantum computing cores for ship operations, but they're so compact. How do you handle the heat?" "Diamond substrate cooling systems," Miller replied. "When you minimize space, you can invest more in advanced materials. Smaller ships mean more resources for what really matters." The holograms shifted again, showing the human fleet's energy distribution during the battle. Baker's tentacles curled in surprise. "Their shield efficiency is impossible. The energy-to-coverage ratio is much better than yours," Miller finished. "Smaller surface area means stronger shields per powered unit." Basic geometry. Dax watched as his analysts became increasingly agitated, not with anger, but with professional excitement. Each revelation showed not primitive technology, but engineering refined to an art form. "But the construction costs," another technician argued. "The precision required." Miller shook his head. "Actually, our ships are cheaper to build. Less material, more automation in construction. We learned centuries ago that efficiency beats excess." He brought up another display, showing the internal systems of a Wasp-class strike craft. "See these maintenance passages, automated repair drones. The whole ship can be serviced by 5 engineers instead of 50. Those resources you spend on life support and crew quarters, we spend them on better weapons and shields." A young analyst raised her hand. "The micro-drone swarms that disabled our sensors, they're not just weapons, are they?" Finally, Miller smiled, someone asking the right questions. "No, they're not. They're part of our regular maintenance system. We just repurposed them." The room buzzed with conversation as the Council's best minds began to understand. Their massive ships, once a source of pride, suddenly seemed wasteful. Their wide corridors and grand chambers, meant to display power, now looked like strategic weaknesses. Dax stepped forward again, but this time his posture was different. Less threatening, more respectful. "Officer Miller, I must know. Why reveal all this now? Miller's expression remained professional, but his eyes twinkled. Admiral Wilson's orders, she said, and I quote, "Show them everything. It'll be more fun that way when they realize we still have more surprises they haven't seen yet." The room fell silent again. Baker's tentacles went completely still. More surprises. "Of course," Miller replied. "You didn't think we'd show all our cards in the first round, did you? Humanity has been preparing for first contact for a very long time. Those ships you saw, they're our diplomatic fleet." Diplomatic fleet? Dax's voice cracked slightly. "You mean?" "As I said before, Admiral," Miller smiled, pulling up one final image, a classified file showing Earth's full military production capabilities. "You've been asking the wrong questions. The right question isn't why are human ships so small. The right question is, what else have we built while everyone was too busy laughing to pay attention?" The council analysts stared at the new data, their previous excitement turning to awe. They had thought humanity's small ships were a sign of weakness. Now they understood. They were looking at the future of space warfare, and humanity was decades ahead of them. Admiral Dax paced on his bridge, watching as his remaining ships attempted to regroup. The previous battle's humiliation still burned, but now it was mixed with a growing sense of respect and fear. "Sir," his tactical officer called out, "the human fleet is moving again." "Pattern?" Dax asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "No known formation, sir. They're dividing into even smaller groups." On her command ship, Admiral Wilson smiled as she issued new orders. "Time for lesson 2, she said. "Show them what our ships can really do." The human fleet split into 10 groups of 5 ships each. The council crews watched in confusion as these tiny squadrons spread out around their massive vessels. "They're too dispersed," Dax muttered. "Their formation makes no tactical sense." His words cut off as his ship's AI blared a warning. Multiple targeting systems DTTT. Across the human fleet, invisible quantum computers spun up to full power. Each small ship carried more computing power than an entire council vessel, all focused on one task: perfect targeting. "Watch this," Wilson said to her bridge crew. "Fire control, demonstrate our point defense capabilities." The council fleet, desperate to regain some advantage, launched a barrage of missiles. Thousands of projectiles streaked across space toward the human ships. What happened next stunned the alien observers. Each human vessel erupted with precise, impossibly fast bursts of energy. Their automated defense systems, guided by AI faster than any organic gunner, struck every incoming missile with perfect accuracy. Not a single missile reached its target. "Impossible," Dax's weapons officer shouted. "They're targeting systems. They're tracking and engaging multiple targets simultaneously." "Of course they are," came Miller's voice from behind them. He had been invited to the bridge to observe. "When you build small, you can invest in better computers. Our targeting AI can track 10,000 objects at once. How many can yours handle?" The council crew's silence was answer enough. Wilson's voice crackled through the command channel. "Admiral Dax, ready for another demonstration." Before he could respond, the human squadrons began moving in complex patterns. Their small size and powerful engines let them execute maneuvers that would tear larger ships apart. "Energy spike," someone shouted. The human ships fired. Not the wild, broad beams typical of space combat, but precise, needle-thin streams of concentrated energy. Each beam struck exactly where intended, slicing through the council ship's shields at their weakest points. "How are they doing this?" Dax demanded. Miller stepped forward. "Simple physics, Admiral. Your large ships need massive shield generators, which create predictable energy patterns. Our quantum computers can analyze those patterns and find the microsecond gaps. Size isn't everything. Precision matters more." Another volley from the human ships. This time, they demonstrated their ship's ability to work in perfect coordination. 5 ships firing together, their beams linking to form geometric patterns that bypassed the Council's strongest defenses. "Sir," Dax's second-in-command reported, "they could have destroyed us 10 times over by now." "They're just showing off." He was right. The human ships were dancing around the Council fleet, demonstrating increasingly complex maneuvers and firing patterns. Each demonstration revealed new capabilities that the aliens had thought impossible. "Admiral Wilson," Dax finally called, his voice heavy with realization. "I believe you've made your point." "Have I?" Wilson responded. "Because we haven't even shown you our stealth systems yet, or our phase shift technology, or our—" "Please," Dax interrupted. "We understand now. Your small ships are not a sign of weakness. They are the product of superior engineering." Wilson's voice carried a hint of satisfaction. "Finally, Officer Miller, would you like to handle the diplomatic arrangements?" Miller stepped forward on the Council bridge. "Admiral Dax, the Earth Defense Force would be happy to discuss technology sharing agreements. Under certain conditions, of course." Dax looked at his crippled fleet, then at the nimble human ships still executing their precise maneuvers. His species had spent centuries building bigger ships, thinking size equaled power. How wrong they had been. "Officer Miller," he said quietly, "I believe it's time we learned some new ways of thinking." The human ships formed up again, their precise formation a silent reminder of how much the galaxy's balance of power had just shifted. The age of the giant warships was over. The era of human innovation had begun. The Great Hall of the Galactic Council looked very different now. Where once there had been laughter at the mention of human ships, now there was tense silence. The emergency session had been called immediately after news of the battle reached the Council homeworld. President Reed stood at the central podium, his usual confidence replaced by careful diplomacy. The holographic displays showed the battle footage, causing murmurs of disbelief among the assembled representatives. "As you can see," Reed said, "we have significantly underestimated human technological capabilities." Admiral Dax stood next to him, his posture humble, very different from his previous arrogance. "The human fleet demonstrated technology far beyond our current understanding. Their ships may be small, but their capabilities are extraordinary." In the Earth section, Tom Miller sat with Admiral Wilson, who had been invited to address the Council. Several alien representatives were stealing glances at them, trying to understand how these humans had hidden such advanced technology. "The floor recognizes Admiral Wilson of Earth," Reed announced. Wilson walked to the podium, her uniform crisp and professional. The room fell completely silent. "Distinguished members of the Council," she began, "Earth does not seek dominance. We seek partnership. Yes, we could have destroyed the Council fleet. Instead, we chose to demonstrate our capabilities peacefully." The Krax representative, who had previously dismissed humans, stood up. How did your species develop such advanced miniaturization?" Wilson activated a holographic display showing Earth's history. "Necessity. Our planet's resources are limited. We learned early that bigger isn't always better. While other species built outward, we built inward. While you focused on size, we focused on efficiency." Another representative raised his hand. "Is it true that your shown fleet was only a diplomatic force?" Miller smiled from his seat as Wilson answered, "Yes. Those were our diplomatic vessels. Would you like to see the specifications of our actual military ships?" "No." Several representatives shouted quickly, causing nervous laughter around the chamber. President Reed cleared his throat. "Admiral Wilson, several council members have already expressed interest in technology sharing agreements." "We're open to discussion," Wilson replied, "under certain conditions." She brought up new images, designs for civilian ships using human miniaturization technology. "We propose a gradual sharing of our advances, starting with non-military applications. Passenger ships that use quarter of the fuel. Cargo vessels that can carry the same load in half the space. Mining ships that can reach places your larger vessels can't access." The chamber erupted in excited discussion. Representatives were already calculating the economic advantages such technology would bring. However, Wilson continued, silencing the room. Earth requires full membership in the Council, with all associated rights and protections. We also require acknowledgement of our sovereign space and independent technological development. President Reed didn't hesitate. I moved to vote on immediate admission of Earth as a full Council member. The vote was unanimous, a first in Council history. As Wilson stepped down from the podium, various representatives rushed to speak with her and Miller. The Cracks representative reached them first. "Admiral," he said, his warrior pride evident in his stance, "my people would be honored to learn from Earth's shipwrights. Perhaps we were too quick to judge based on size alone." Miller watched as more representatives lined up to speak with Wilson. He noticed how they now kept respectful distances, their body language showing deference rather than the previous condescension. "Admiral," a young alien engineer called out, "is it true your ships can manufacture replacement parts internally?" "And your quantum computing cores?" Another added. "How did you solve the heat dissipation issues?" Wilson held up her hands. "All in good time. First, we establish formal diplomatic relations. Then we begin sharing technology in stages. Earth believes in earning trust, not demanding it." President Reed approached their group. "Admiral Wilson, Officer Miller, the Council would be honored if Earth would consider hosting our next diplomatic summit. Perhaps we could tour one of your shipyards." "Of course," Wilson smiled. "We'd be happy to show you our newest designs. After all, we've barely scratched the surface of what our tiny ships can do." The message was clear to everyone in the chamber. The galaxy's balance of power had shifted, not through conquest or intimidation, but through human ingenuity and restraint. The era of dismissing anything small had ended. The time had come for the galaxy to think differently, to think efficiently, to think like humans. 6 months after the historic confrontation, Earth's largest shipyard hung in orbit above the blue planet. Its efficient, compact design reflected the human philosophy that had changed galactic engineering forever. Admiral Dax stood at the observation window, staring in wonder at the construction bays below. Where alien shipyards would build one massive vessel, the human facility simultaneously assembled dozens of smaller, more powerful ships. "Impressive, isn't it?" Tom Miller asked, joining him at the window. "Today's a big day. The first joint Human Council ship launches." Down in the main construction bay, Admiral Wilson supervised final preparations. The new vessel represented everything humanity had brought to galactic ship design. At 1/3 the size of traditional Council ships, it contained twice the capabilities. "Ready for launch," the yardmaster announced. The ship's name gleamed on its hull, Unity. It was smaller than any Council capital ship, yet its advanced systems made it the most powerful vessel ever built. "You know," Dax said quietly, 6 months ago, I would have laughed at a ship this size. Now," he shook his head in amazement, "now every species in the Council wants one." Miller smiled. "Funny how things change. Our shipyards have orders backed up for the next 3 years." Below them, the Unity's engines powered up. Its reactor core, built with human miniaturization technology, hummed to life. Energy readings exceeded anything the Council had previously achieved. President Reed, who had arrived for the launch ceremony, joined them at the window. "When I think of how we initially reacted to human ships," he looked embarrassed. "Well, let's just say the Council has learned valuable lessons about judging by appearances. The physical size of a civilization's ships," Wilson said, walking up to join them, "doesn't reflect their advancement. It's what you do with the space you have that matters." The observation deck filled with representatives from various species, all watching as the UNIT prepared for its maiden voyage. The ship represented more than just new technology. It symbolized a fundamental shift in galactic thinking. Orders for compact design ships have increased by 500%, Miller reported, checking his datapad. Every major shipyard in council space is being retrofitted with human engineering principles. The Unity's first captain, a council officer trained by human instructors, appeared on the main screen. Final checks complete. Requesting permission to launch. Permission granted, Wilson and Dax said together, sharing a smile at their synchronized response. The ship moved gracefully out of its construction bay. Its movement demonstrated the perfect blend of human efficiency and council engineering traditions. Several alien observers gasped as it executed a perfect high-speed turn, a maneuver impossible for larger vessels. "Amazing," Dax whispered. "Simply amazing." "Oh, that's nothing," Wilson grinned. "Wait until you see the full capabilities demonstration next week." The gathered representatives chatted excitedly, discussing future applications of human technology. Some talked about redesigning passenger liners, others about revolutionary new mining vessels. The galaxy was changing, one small ship at a time. "You know what the best part is?" Miller asked the group. "We're just getting started. Our research teams have developed even more efficient designs. The next generation of ships will be even more impressive." President Reed looked concerned for a moment. "Even smaller?" "No," Wilson laughed. "We found the optimal size range. Now we're just making them smarter, faster, and more efficient. Size isn't everything. But neither is smallness. It's about finding the perfect balance." The Unity engaged its main drive, accelerating with impossible grace. Its energy trails formed beautiful patterns against the stars, demonstrating the precision of its human-designed engines. "To the future," Dax proposed, raising a glass of Earth champagne that had been distributed for the occasion. "To partnership," Reed added. "To thinking differently," Miller suggested. Wilson smiled, watching the Unity disappear into the darkness of space, carrying the hopes of two civilizations with it. "To small packages," she said, "and the big surprises they contain." As the gathered representatives celebrated, more ships moved through the construction bays below. Each represented the new direction of galactic shipbuilding. The age of massive, wasteful vessels was over. The era of efficient, powerful ships had begun. And it all started because someone laughed at a tiny fleet.